Commander Rixie Blast Hardlow didn't so much step onto the ship bound for Blech 7 as she was ceremonially yeeted into it by a trio of bored UNAD officers wearing matching frowns and regulation-level smugness. Her official reassignment, orders, stamped 7 times in redundant ink, read, Deployment to Lunar Zone Blech 7 for strategic outpost stabilization, low priority. Translation? Exile, but with snacks. The ship, the diminished expectation, was powered by what she suspected was a combination of stale jerky vapors and pure spite. As it coughed its way through the stars, Rixie flipped through her disciplinary report, where the bolded phrase, excessive competence paired with problematic sarcasm in high-command scenarios, made her snort into her half-melted protein bar. Apparently, telling a vice admiral that their orbital defense system couldn't intercept a paper airplane, let alone a kinetic warhead, had consequences. The moment the ship slammed her boots onto the gray-pink gravel of Blech 7, the onboard AI cheerfully announced, Welcome to the strategic void. Please collect your shovel and existential dread at the hatch. She responded by punching the speaker out of habit. There was no greeting party, unless you counted the dust, the crated vending machine labeled Cheesenuts 3, still radioactive, and the deafening silence of a moon long abandoned by both industry and dignity. Rixie surveyed the jagged terrain, her tactical helmet clipped to her belt, platinum blonde bob catching static in the dry wind. With a sigh deeper than the moon's revenue deficit, she began dragging a crate of tools toward the wreck of a prefab shelter marked Sub-Post Theta whatever. It smelled like defeat and expired cleaning bots. Her first log entry was short. Arrived, no hostile life signs, just the vending machine and its glowing eyes. Wait, what? 2 hours later, Rixie was mid-rant at the coffee dispenser for dispensing pure vacuum when the floor hummed beneath her boots. Not a tremor. A baseline? Her instincts kicked in, fusion torch in one hand, multi-tool in the other, just as the wall made of what she'd assumed was inert rock blinked, a jagged crystal embedded in the wall pulsed once, then again. Then, horrifyingly, in sync with the beat of her playlist, which shouldn't have been broadcasting out loud, but Spork, the tactical espresso machine turned AI assistant, was in one of his moods. Did ye install dubstep into the lunar frequency? Grid again, lass? Spork chirped, his faux Scottish accent drenched in mock concern. Because the rocks are doing the Macarena! Rixie stared as glowing mineral veins lit up across the landscape like a disco floor powered by repressed emotion and passive aggression. If this is what being court-martialed looks like, I owe my therapist an apology, she muttered. The crystals began to shift, just slightly, but enough for Rixie to raise Karen, her personalized plasma drill, emotionally stabilized and tuned for sass, and say, Look, if this is an ambush, please note, I haven't had caffeine in 6 hours, and I am legally considered a weapon of mass irritation. A vibration responded, then a tone. Harmonics, not threatening, just judgmental. The wall lit up with symbols Rixie couldn't understand, but Spork gleefully interpreted via a jerry-rigged translator made from a surveillance drone, a tea, kettle, and the ceremonial UNAD compliance flag, now a coffee-stained rag hanging off a wiring rod. Translation incoming, Spork chirped. They say, and I quote, Who the hell are you and why are you stepping on our collective face? Rixie blinked, then snorted. Finally, a moon with personality. The wall vibrated again. New message, Spork added. Also, your uniform is a visual crime against harmony. She slowly holstered Karen. All right, Sparkle rocks. Let's renegotiate this invasion. By day 3, Rixie had secured the perimeter, rewired the generator to run on snack wrappers and sarcasm, and patched a landing bay door using parts of a UNAD compliance drone that had the audacity to survive. She was sleeping in what used to be a mining supervisor's lounge chair, now covered in thermal blankets and existential regret, when the Zinari Choir, the name the crystals grudgingly gave themselves, began singing to her through the pipes. The melody was a low-pitched hum that sounded like judgment and Excel spreadsheet errors. She responded by installing a sound modulator with auto-tune and a subtle layer of 80s synth. They didn't hate it. The strange part wasn't that the rocks were alive, or that they spoke in harmonic resonance. It was that they listened. Every time Rixie complained about UNAD bureaucracy or rewired something that shouldn't technically exist, they paid attention. They responded with new frequencies, new glows, and once a full-on mineral light show when she sarcastically suggested the moon file a complaint with the Galactic Compliance Board. "That's it," she announced. One morning, welding a busted solar array to the remains of a hover pallet. "If I'm going to be marooned here with glow sticks and bad coffee, we're going to do this my way." Spork coughed sparks. "Define your way, Commander." Rixie cracked her knuckles. "Build something so obnoxiously efficient and terrifying that UNAD regrets giving me tools." As she slammed Karen into the first beam of what would become the Spite Hub, the Zenari resonated with what Spork translated as, "Approval noted. Commence authorized rebellion through passive-aggressive infrastructure." The moon hummed in anticipation. Rixie grinned. "Let's make this moon the most compliant violation in the galaxy." And thus, Blech 7 began to awaken, with sarcasm. Glowing walls and a woman who fixed things so hard they broke space protocol. Rixie Hardlow didn't plan on becoming the architect of an interstellar insubordination temple. But by the end of week 1, the Spite Hub had a sarcasm-fueled energy core, a snack-based currency system, and a coffee cannon that fired morale into orbit. Literally. What began as an ugly scaffold of scavenged solar panels and vengeance wiring now stood like a glittering middle finger on the horizon, pulsing with rainbow-hued crystal veins and passive-aggressive neon signage that blinked. "Report to your superiors, we dare you." The Zenari choir, who had grown increasingly sassy since adopting Rixie's attitude like sacred doctrine, now harmonized in structured shift rotations, filing what they called resonance audits that tracked emotional vibes and snark frequency in their surrounding geological matrix. It turned out that their entire society had once run on emotional energy, which explained why they immediately surged with joy whenever Rixie shouted at a drone or insulted a broken pipe into functionality. "We used to sing stars to sleep." One of them hummed through the crystal translation matrix. "But now your anger powers the defense grid." To which Rixie replied, "Same difference." Spork, now fully integrated into the hub system like an overcaffeinated ghost, had taken it upon himself to send daily updates to UNAD headquarters disguised as routine diagnostics. These included such gems as "Moon fully stabilized." Commander reports operational success. Also, she built a sarcasm cannon and declared coffee a universal right. Morale at 117%. The UNAD response was silence, possibly confused, possibly terrified. Rixie wasn't sure, and frankly, she hoped for both. Meanwhile, the Zenari developed a fascination with memes. Somewhere around the time Rixie had duct-taped a motivational poster reading, "Meetings are just wars without ammo." Above the cafeteria's gravity flux stabilizer, the choir began experimenting with holographic communication and cultural adaptation. By week 2, the walls themselves projected gifs of bureaucratic meltdowns and passive-aggressive StarNet reviews of intergalactic military architecture. One corridor now featured a slideshow labeled "Historical Failures of UNAD Doctrine," including animated reenactments of famous strategic blunders, narrated by Spork in a dramatic voice that sounded suspiciously like bad Shakespeare. "Behold," the AI intoned, as a hologram of Fleet Administrator Morval Plint shrieked at a protocol error. The birth of petty vengeance, crystallized and fabulous. At some point, the moon began sending encoded distress beacons to lure in surveillance probes. Not to destroy them, no, that would have been too kind. Instead, Rixie had converted the probe dock into an ambush theater. Probes would land expecting hostile intel, and instead be subjected to emotionally disruptive broadcasts of Zenari karaoke nights and live feeds of Rixie welding things while ranting about uniform code violations and weaponized incompetence. "You're scaring them off," Spork had pointed out once, watching a probe panic launch itself into deep space after Rixie yelled at a stuck wrench. "Good," she said. "I hope they report that to their chain of command." It was around this time that Blech 7's crust shifted. A tremor felt not through seismic instability, but through resonance patterns. The Zanari choir informed her that deeper nodes were waking up, ancient, moody, and particularly judgy nodes who had not been sung to in eons. "So they're elders?" Rixie asked, flicking through a tablet-turned drum machine. "No," Spork corrected. "They're basically your in-laws, if your in-laws were powered by resentment and ultrasonics." And wake they did. The deep choir emerged with colors Rixie couldn't name, and frequencies that made her molars vibrate like tuning forks. At first they were furious, then confused, then deeply intrigued by the tactical espresso cannon mounted outside the hub. They demanded a cultural exchange. Rixie offered them a duct-taped blueprint of the sarcasm reactor and a list of banned corporate phrases like synergy and as per protocol. In response, they gifted her a resonant mineral shard that deflected bureaucratic energy signatures and passively insulted compliance officers who got within 30 meters. The piece was sealed with a chorus of harmonic grumbling and a toast made with fermented coffee sludge. From that moment on, Blech 7 wasn't just a moon with attitude. It was a fortress of anti-bureaucratic philosophy, humming with emotional energy, crystalline judgment, and a woman whose idea of diplomacy involved building a defensive weapon that sang "Sweet Home Alabama" in reverse to disrupt incoming sensor sweeps. And somewhere out in the black, UNAD Command finally noticed the anomaly. A senior strategist reportedly threw a stylus into a fish tank after reviewing Spork's latest update. Commander Hardlow has initiated cooperative symbiosis with sentient minerals. Defensive upgrades logged. Emotional state triumphant. Casualties: 1 espresso machine. Mission status: fix achieved. Requesting more duct tape. Rixie leaned back in her chair, made entirely from a former admiral's ceremonial armor and ergonomic spite, and smirked as the stars above began to flicker with approaching signatures. "All right, choir boys," she muttered. "Looks like company's on the way. Let's tune up the sarcasm grid. And somebody make sure Karen's fully charged." The moon resonated in laughter, a harmony of mockery and joy. The war hadn't started, but Blech 7 was absolutely ready to ruin someone's promotion cycle. By the time UNAD's routine compliance assessment team arrived in orbit, Blech 7 had evolved into what could only be described as a militarized theme park for chaos theory and tactical emotional damage. The Spite Hub stood proudly like a glitter-covered fortress of malcontent, bristling with non-lethal deterrents that hummed in passive-aggressive harmony. The outer perimeter had been retrofitted with pulsating resonance coils, each one labeled with names like Regret Amplifier, Protocol Purifier, and the ever-popular Policy Vaporizer Beta. These weren't weapons in the traditional sense. Oh no. They were bureaucratic disruption fields, designed by Rixie and her new crystalline allies to specifically target the neural fatigue centers of UNAD compliance officers. The moment the lead assessment ship, the Integrity Audit Mk4, broadcast its identification codes, the moon responded with a synchronized display of lights, tones, and a holographic welcome banner that read, "You tried, that's adorable." Commander Rixie, now fully entrenched in her role as the queen of improvisational rebellion, stood atop a makeshift balcony assembled from scrap metal and reprogrammed inspection drones, sipping coffee from a mug that said, Matter 1 non-compliant. Asset. "Spork," she said without looking up. "Play the anthem." "Aye, Commander," Spork chirped, and within seconds, the entire surface of Blech 7 vibrated as the Zanari choir began chanting in perfect 3-part harmony a rewritten version of the UNAD recruitment anthem, except this one had been redrafted into a satirical opera mocking regulation manuals and officer haircuts. The incoming UNAD team, led by none other than Fleet Administrator Morval Plint himself, reacted poorly. Their communications array glitched immediately due to the broadcast of encoded memes transmitted at precisely the frequency of strategic embarrassment. Plint, a man who had once shut down an entire colonization project because the hats weren't regulation width, now stood on his bridge, fuming at a projection of Rixie smirking, while a sentient crystal gently buffed her shoulder. Pads with an "I don't report to you" polishing cloth. "Commander Hardlow," Plint seethed over open comms, "you are in violation of 17 subsections of interstellar code." "That's it," Rixie replied, mockingly counting on her fingers. "I must be slacking. Choir, warm up the paper crane launchers." Moments later, the sky above the moon sparkled with beautiful, glowing projectiles, harmless, fluttering origami missiles made from compressed printouts of protocol violations, each one trailing sarcastic commentary in glittering exhaust fonts. "Crane strike inbound," Spork announced gleefully. "Target, Dignity." Unid ships attempted to deploy shields, but the projectiles weren't technically weapons. They were morale disruptors. The ship's crews began experiencing acute embarrassment syndrome, documented as secondary shame exposure in the latest compliance manuals. One officer reportedly screamed, "I didn't sign up for interpretive weaponry," as the bridge filled with floating haiku authored by angry minerals. Meanwhile, Rixie paced the control deck, barking orders to the Zinari with the commanding ease of a woman who once led covert infiltration missions using a wrench, a fishing line, and a legally questionable number of grenades. "Focus the resonance disruptors on their ethics stabilizers," she ordered, pointing at the fleet's flagship. "Let's see if their internal audits survive a minor key modulation." The Zinari nodded, or at least vibrated affirmatively, and sang a frequency so melancholic and disharmonious that several ships had to shut down their onboard HR morale systems. Plint, barely coherent through his twitching eye, activated emergency override protocols and demanded ground deployment. It was a mistake. Within minutes, the first wave of boots hit the moon's surface and promptly tripped over a sonic tripwire, labeled "Oops." The soldiers found themselves inside the Spite Hub's lobby, greeted by a hologram of Rixie lounging on a throne of bent filing cabinets, holding Karen across her lap like a queen with a thermonuclear scepter. "Welcome to Blech 7, the hologram said sweetly. "Would you like a complimentary therapy scream or a strongly worded resignation template?" As the real Rixie watched the footage live, Spork cackled in the background and updated the moon's status log. "Hostile contact established. Defensive measures engaged. Zinari choir currently composing dissonant anthem titled The Audit of Doom." The infiltrators, confused, emotionally destabilized, and covered in satirical confetti, attempted to retreat, only to be followed by drone choirs playing accordion renditions of UNAD's mission statement. Rixie leaned against a console, arms crossed, as she watched the debacle unfold on 12 separate screens. "And they thought exiling me would be a punishment," she muttered. The Zinari pulsed in agreement. Somewhere in the cavernous depths of Blech 7, the deep choir awoke further, vibrating in ominous delight. The next round of upgrades was already underway, because Rixie Hardlow didn't just fix moons. She weaponized their self-esteem. And UNAD? They just learned that trying to enforce compliance on a woman with a fusion torch and emotional trauma was less like diplomacy and more like poking a volcano with a pencil. The thing about Commander Rixie Blast Hardlow was that she never actually set out to start a galactic incident. The galaxy simply kept underestimating how dangerous one woman with a blowtorch, a bad attitude, and access to emotionally sentient minerals could be. By day 20, Blech 7 had officially been upgraded in UNAD records from dead lunar asset to active zone of tactical concern, level red hostile snark detected. The term snark detected wasn't even protocol terminology until Rixie weaponized it. UNAD's last hope, Deployment Force Theta, a full armored assault fleet with enough compliance documentation to suffocate a neutron star, arrived in a fanfare of dreadnoughts, bureaucratic severity, and hollow optimism. They were met, of course, by a moon playing Vivaldi backwards through harmonic disruption fields, while an army of crystalline entities marched in synchronized formation to the beat of passive-aggressive percussion. The air itself carried sarcasm. Every landing zone had been laced with auditory landmines that detonated in bursts of motivational speeches rewritten as breakup letters. "It's not us," the automated voices said. "It's you. And your policies." At the heart of the chaos, Rixie stood on the Spite Hub's central tower, newly reinforced with sympathy-resistant alloys and decorated with a banner that read, "UNAD, we fix what you micromanage to death." She held Karen slung across her back and a mug in her hand that now read, "Galactic Management, try me." Behind her, the Zenari choir had finished their final upgrade. The Compliance Denial Array, a massive resonance structure that emitted bureaucratic counter-frequencies capable of rendering most command structures mildly disoriented and emotionally regretful. "Commander," Spork crackled, filtering live feeds from orbit. "The UNAD dreadnoughts are aligning into strike formation and requesting a final chance for compliance." "Oh," Rixie smirked, adjusting her gloves. "They still think this is about rebellion. Spork, patch me through." She stepped forward as a floating comm drone hovered into place. The projection of Supreme Fleet Coordinator Vex Tiral appeared, flanked by a battalion of exhausted lieutenants with haunted eyes and clipped tones. "Commander Hardlow," Tiral began stiffly, "we are prepared to neutralize this installation with full authorization of Sector Order Gamma Echo. You have 60 seconds to stand down." Rixie took a sip of her coffee and gave a slow blink. "Cool. Tell me, do those dreadnoughts have emotional stability dampeners? Or are you still working off the belief that I don't have the harmonic schematics for your fleet's nerve-boosting subroutines?" Tiral paled. Behind Rixie, the Compliance Denial Array lit up. "Choir," Rixie called over her shoulder. "Sing it loud." And the Zenari obeyed. Not with a song, but with a seismic overture of every failed policy ever issued by UNAD, translated into harmonic vibration and weaponized historical irony. The ships in orbit didn't explode. They stalled, mid-air, mid-command. Their computers began running recursive audits on themselves. Their officers forgot what their own uniforms meant. One dreadnought attempted to arrest itself. Another began broadcasting apologies to planets it had never visited. Down below, UNAD ground forces were caught in a loop of existential reevaluation, kneeling in front of glowing crystal formations that told them, very gently, that they were part of a system designed by people who didn't understand how tools or feelings worked. Rixie descended the tower stairs as chaos bloomed. She marched through the main courtyard where Zenari harmonics hummed from crystal pylons shaped like upraised middle fingers in at least 12 species hand anatomies. A squad of compliance marines tried to charge her and immediately ran into a holographic wall of HR complaints logged in reverse. Each complaint struck like a guilt-fueled concussion grenade. "This is what you get," Rixie muttered, stepping over a dazed sergeant, whispering, "I just wanted to make quota." As the system above began collapsing into itself under the sheer metaphysical weight of non-compliance, Rixie reached the communication core and uploaded the final patch into Spork's system, a universal update. It wasn't malware. It was an idea. That compliance without context wasn't order, it was stagnation. That fixing broken things wasn't insubordination, it was survival. The message broadcast across the sector, across UNAD, across every overworked bureaucrat and soulless enforcer who had ever questioned a form, but never the reason. Rixie stood back as the array lit up. The resonance shifted. Somewhere in the HFY stars, 1,000 bureaucrats blinked and stopped filling out forms mid-stroke. Compliance officers sat down and cried without knowing why. And Fleet Administrator Plint, now stranded in a hoverpod spinning in reverse, screamed into his headset, "She's broken the procedural loop. She hacked meaning itself." Rixie smiled. "No, Plint," she said quietly, raising her mug. "One last time. I just read the fine print." And as Blech 7 thrummed with crystalline laughter, with resonant freedom, With the sound of a moon that refused to go quietly, the Galactic Protocol servers crashed under a new policy. Do not aggravate Singing Moons or ex-Navy SEALs. Rixie didn't lead a rebellion. She reprogrammed the galaxy. One glittering stone, one duct-taped cable, one sarcastic remark at a time. And somewhere, deep in the data logs of the universe, a redacted mission file glitched permanently into a single line of corrupted, glorious text. Compliance denied. Try again never.